This week we are doing a slightly different solo show. For one thing, it's not live. And for two, I'm going to give you a little bit of a travel log, a little bit of what I did in my holidays. Not that it was a holiday, that's a book reference for you old timers out there. I want to tell you about visiting the Island of the Witches, which is Siquijor in the Philippines. So I guess we'll start talking about the Philippines and move in from there. It takes 3.5 days to get to Siquijor from where I am in southern Tasmania. And part of that is just the realities of travel now. It was overnight. And by realities of travel, I mean you have to expect flight cancellations and delays and all the rest of it in a way that we never had to prior to, some rules that came about over the last 3 years that have resulted in widespread sicknesses and so on, which was the case. We had a sick pilot that no one could find and whatever. We're moving back into a world of slower travel. It used to, it is the other side of the world, but it used to take several days on an aeroplane to get to London from Australia. Anyway, so it took 3.5 days, overnight Sydney, overnight Manila, overnight Dumaguete, which is the nearest big town, I suppose, to Siquijor, and then very early the next morning getting a ferry over because there is no airport. There actually is. It's just not open yet. They've classic developing country story. They've got all the money for it. It's long overdue, and it's supposed to be 3 years away, and everyone on the island that I spoke to scoffed at that idea. What I have to tell you about the Philippines is unfortunately a cliche in the sense that everyone says this. And it's usually the hallmark of an unsophisticated traveler to say, oh, the people are so nice. It's like, oh, really? The woman manning the omelet station was nice to you, was she? It's usually a sign that people haven't left the boundaries of where employees are paid to be nice to them. I didn't stay anywhere with an omelet station, and it is nevertheless true that Filipinos are so nice they make you feel guilty about basically every decision and interaction you've made in your life because it wasn't as nice as them. That part of the Filipino story is true and wonderful. And random people will talk to you. The singing thing is real. It is the spiritual home of karaoke. One of my closest friends growing up, she born in Australia, but to a Filipino mother. And whenever we'd be over there on the weekends and her mother's friends would come over. When you're 15, everything your mother does is mortifying. But when it happens to be middle of the afternoon karaoke with 7 other Filipino women, my friend was, suitably mortified. Anyway, that's real. The Philippines is the spiritual home of karaoke, and people will sing where and whenever. And most of the time that's lovely. However, you may recall the trouble with karaoke is you're very much in a Celine Dion ballad cover world. There are a lot of unnecessary covers, is how I'll say it, that I heard in my time there. But, seeing the positive side of that, you're dealing with the people who are unbelievably friendly, like things like singing and so on. So Philippines in general, it was my first time visiting, and I was there to visit Siquijor, so I didn't see much of it. A couple of days in Manila, and otherwise straight there and back. So take that for what it's worth, but my experience certainly jives with literally anyone who's ever been to the Philippines, which is these people are so nice. I just am so guilty about how I live because I thought I was nice before I went to the Philippines, and then I get there and find out, this is nice. I have not been doing it right. If you would like to be amongst wonderful people and are looking for a holiday destination, I commend the Philippines to you, but be warned, you will feel terrible about yourself because the stereotypes, the rumors of their niceness are true. The other thing I want to say about Filipino life in general is they're already living in the future in the same way Ecuador, which I spent some time in last year, is already living in the future. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean the actual future that's happening, not the Jetsons' future. So I first noticed this in Ecuador, but when you're in regional Ecuador, if the gas station doesn't have any gas, then you don't have gas for your truck or your scooter or whatever you happen to be getting around in. And the Philippines, obviously it's 120 million people on a bunch of islands, so it's crowded, which means not everyone's going to get an American-style SUV, even if from an average salary perspective that was realistic. But it's also just far more fuel efficient to have a scooter or a trike. And you even rent, like, instead of a taxi, you get on the back of someone's scooter. And it's more efficient. You get more people on the roads. The road rules, consequently, are far more organic because essentially people are on bikes. And I don't mean motorbikes that are big and obey road rules. I mean, you recall being a kid, being on bikes. So people are going slower. People duck and move around stuff. It's far more efficient to the condition of the roads, the affordability and availability of fuel, and so on. Ecuador was the same. Now, I do have some sympathy to the criticism of what I just said, which is that is, oh, it's all right for you to say with your, in theory, at least for now, reliable fuel, blah, 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 blah. And to some extent, that's true. There are kind of classic, not even just left, but like specifically Marxist materialist conditions analysis would suggest that, of course. The trouble is that's kind of an erasure, right? Because it implies that Filipino life or Ecuadorian life is somehow incomplete or insufficient because it doesn't look sufficiently like American life yet to be deemed, or for me to be able to say, actually, I quite like how they live, because they do. And I fancy a lot of them do. And it doesn't mean that life is perfect there. It's not perfect anywhere. But you're dealing with extremely happy people. Ecuador, less happy, but similar. They just live their lives. Their family is strong. They deal with the chaos of unreliability of everything. So power cuts, or especially in islands, like even if it was a developed island, you're going to get that, right? And so life isn't built in the same way ours is built on access to continuous and unlimited energy. And one little hiccup of that, and we turn to shit. That's what I mean by Ecuador and the Philippines are already living in the future. And I would even say an ideal future, because it's already adapted to chaos and unreliability. And they never lost something which we did, which we will have to recover, which is community and family. So this is what I mean by it's an erasure of their lifeways. They don't make as much money as we do. They don't have an SUV. I don't have an SUV. But in the meantime, they have Saints fiestas. They know their neighbors. They don't work as hard as we do. They're literally happier. They're nicer. They spend more time with family. The people I hung out with on the island were mostly, so I had a guide who I will introduce you to over the course of this podcast, named Chelsea. And his job is a tour guide. And so he'll wake up in the morning and either someone will have found him via his Facebook page linked up below, or someone at one of the hotels will have recommended him, or he'll just not have a client that day. And that's just how he lives. And he lives with family, so there's no rent. And if he doesn't have work, which, by the way, is driving people around a tropical island pointing out beaches. So it's actually a really nice job, right? There is no stress associated with it. I had a shamanic healing client today who pointed out, I asked about his stress levels, and he's like, well, what is the baseline stress level of living in the West anyway, right? Is it a 5 out of 10 just because of how we live and looming war and so on? The baseline stress level, as far as I could tell on Siquijor, is 1.5 to our 5. There's a lot of what they're doing that's not just right, but my impression in Ecuador was it's the future. We're heading into a world where we live like Ecuadorians. They don't live like us, and they're better at it than we are. And I actually found a lot of inspiration in that. So controversial, yes, and I definitely have sympathy for the material conditions analysis that suggests, which they should have better access to clean drinking water, education, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. All true. And the water was fine. I just use that as a broader example, especially given that you can't turn around without a toxic train derailing in the US. So the idea that people in the Philippines should be heading towards an American life, not in Ohio, right? Anyway, I just did want to point out that I'm always inspired by the adaptability of people who can live with chaos and unreliability, because we can't. We really can't do it. And that is our undoing. One little hiccup, 90 minutes of lack of internet, and we're suicidal. It's disgusting, actually, is what it is. There's no other way to paint it. And my point is, I learn in Ecuador and Philippines that there is another and better way of, like literally better way of living. And I can say that while still having sympathy for, as I said, like a material conditions analysis of, particularly on a global basis, what's going on. Ecuador is an excellent example of neoliberal harvesting of resources that belong to indigenous peoples. So it doesn't mean, oh, it's fine. They still retain their family connections, so we'll just have all their oil and cut down the Amazon. I don't mean that. I mean, they are better at living with what we're about to live with, which is chaos and unreliability and unpredictability. And there is inspiration in that, as there should be. The other fun thing that I noticed, this might just, although I did hear it in Manila as well, you'll know this if you are a regular traveler of a certain age, I suppose, where you don't want to be called a tourist. No, I'm a traveler. I think you will find, good sir or good madam. And so there's always that tension between, are you a tourist or are you a traveler? The Filipinos get around this by calling everyone foreigner, which is true. Like, I can push back and say, I'm not a tourist, I'm a traveler, but I'm definitely a foreigner. And not just that, foreigner is applied to, so for instance, the Airbnb that I stayed at is owned by a retired couple now. She's Filipino, her family's from Siquijor, and he's German, and they spent a bunch of time, I think, working and living in Brussels whilst building this beautiful, beautiful guest house situation. He's still a foreigner. He's raised Filipino kids who are now living as dentists in Amsterdam and whatever, but in Siquijor, he's still a foreigner. And I like that. I like the pragmatism, and that's real island thinking. Are you from here? No. Then you are a foreigner. And it's not said with malice, it's just said with the practicalities of the map. So it was learning to say that. It's really an understanding that I am a foreigner, as is the owner of the guest house, who, because he's from Germany, he lives there and has lived there for decades. His wife's family is from Siquijor. And so he essentially raised up Siquijor children, but he's foreigner. So we're in that category. It's not like a tourist versus traveler or visitor category. It's foreigner or from there. And there was something really clean and efficient about that categorization. But what sat with me is, oh, here I don't have to be, no, not a tourist. Here I'm just foreigner. There is no tourist, there is no traveler. There is just foreigner or visitor. And again, it's clean. I like it. I'm into it. But Siquijor itself, the Island of the Witches. Now let me start with the name. Why is it called the Island of the Witches? It used to be Isla del Fuego, Island of Fire, or Fire Island, but not the gay one. Named so by the Spanish because of the fireflies that were seen in the woods as they were sailing by. The legend is that the Spanish were sailing by and were unwell and came ashore to get assistance. And the natives healed them with the plant medicines of Siquijor itself. And so I got the name Island of the Witches, obviously, from that. Now, I will say, mostly that's just because the title sounds sexy, Island of the Witches. It did used to be called that. It is now called, and they will correct you, and rightly so, Island of the Healers. And it is known throughout, well, the world, but the Philippines for being so, Siquijor is where the Island of Healers is. And interestingly, talking to some of the people that I did, because I was there for work, working on the next Scarlet Imprint book. One retired professor I spoke to wrote at the beginning of her book, because obviously she's retired now, but she had a whole career in academia in the Philippines. And if she'd be at a conference in Manila, let's say, and other delegates found out she was from Siquijor, they would joke and say, oh, did you fly here on your broom? Which sounds cute to us, but what you actually have to hear underneath that is a kind of modernist racism. It's implying that the people of Siquijor are backwards or primitive or savage or all those sort of things. So Island of Healers has been a real move in that direction. And one of the things that I wanted to go and find out is why Siquijor? Because I couldn't find out beforehand. Why is this island and not any other island known as the Island of the Healers? And that's one of the primary things that I went there to find out is there a specific technique? Are there native traditions? Something in the ancient history or ancient politics of the island that suggests as why this is the Island of Healers and not the one next door or across the archipelago or wherever, right? And that was an interesting question to ask. And because the answer was because it's Siquijor. It's the island itself. And when I landed, because again, you can only really get there by ferry, I could sort of feel that when I got ashore. But how the geography, the sacred geography of Siquijor works is like an island. Everyone lives around the edge of it. And I stayed in San Juan, which is the sort of main tourist town, mostly because I couldn't find anywhere else. But that was the right call because there aren't a lot of amenities on the island, and you at least have restaurants and a little shop there and so on. You can stay in the main towns, the town itself of Siquijor or Loreto, but you're staying in a bustling and frankly polluted, hectic town with not a lot to do tourist-wise. At least with San Juan, you're near the marine reserves and so on. Not what I was there for. I got in the water precisely once to go scuba diving one day. But anyway, so that's where I was staying. And whilst looking for the healers, I knew they were in the mountains. So there's a sacred mountain, Mount Bandilaan, towards the middle of the island. And I knew that they kind of lived in the towns around that. And so as I'm being taken up there, and then I finally managed to rent a car, when I got up into the mountains, up into the uplands on Mount Bandilaan, I got it. When they said, it's about Siquijor, the feeling on Mount Bandilaan is like Iona or Holy Isle or the Andes, certain mountains in the Andes. It is the mountain itself that generates this healing capacity. And there are endemics that only grow on Siquijor that are used in healing, to the point that other people will come and, like from Mindanao or other nearby islands, to collect them. And also to train. So Siquijor is the Island of Healers, and it has its own native healing tradition. But if you are from other islands and you are in a healing capacity, you might come to Siquijor to train with people who are here. I have more to say about that in a minute. So you have plants that only grow on this mountain, and you have the feeling of the mountain itself. One of the things that I wanted to understand, and I now do, about getting there, we would describe it differently, we being people not from Siquijor. I can describe it in a global context. What it reminded me of was like a tropical holy isle, because if you ask yourself, well, why was Holy Isle sacred? Why was that the druidic magical island? And you can say stuff like, oh, well, the Irish Sea was sort of a highway at the time, which is true. And I'm sure that was a factor. But Holy Isle is Holy Isle because it's Holy Isle. And when you get there, you feel it. And so Siquijor is to some extent a tropical holy isle. It's Siquijor because it's Siquijor. It's the Island of the Healers because it just is. And that was a really important thing for me to understand from the perspective of writing the next book. And also just personally, like, oh, I get it now. So there isn't a secret tradition that is unique to that island. And that's why it's the Island of Healers. So it's not the location of a specific lineage. So which, funnily enough, I guess you could say Holy Isle was. But I meant more, it's not Eleusis, right? It's the actual place itself is healing. And in fact, going up to visit one of the herb-based healers, Noel, he was saying, oh no, it wasn't he was saying. We found where I should have stayed, at least for a couple of the nights, across from his hut. All of this is linked up in a Google map below. And if not, I've actually added the places, which was really long and arduous. So if you're listening to this, you will be able to find the 3 healers that I reference on Google Maps now: Annie Ponce, and Noel Torimocha and Loreto Kimno. He's a Bula, but we'll get to that in a minute. You'll actually be able to find them on Google Maps because I've manually added them because they were not there before. More on that story in a minute. Anyway, Noel lives up basically on Mount Bandilaan, but in like the uplands in the middle of the island. And we went, my guide and I, Chelsea, went for lunch at this, Noel's recommendation, at a hotel, like an eco lodge, a very low-tech one, let's say that, near his house. And it was marvelous. And just being in that energy, I was saying to Chelsea, to my guide, you could come to Siquijor and stay in the mountains and not visit one of the healers, and you would still get a healing effect. It's just that feeling of it is really powerful and elevated and healing. So that's the landscape informing the healing. Now, it's been I guess a couple of months of travel. I had to go to New Zealand for a wedding, and I was supposed to hang out with Monteferro and do some more work with him again on the book, but there was cyclones and earthquakes. It was crazy. And because it was traveling for work, traveling for a wedding, and traveling to stay for some health treatments in Auckland, the last few places I've gone, I always go for like multiple reasons, which means I have 2 checked bags and the carry-on. And when you're traveling on your own, it's stupid because, weddings, and I was MC of the wedding. I couldn't just sit up the back in my crummy clothing. People were looking at me. So you have to have wedding clothing, even casual weddings. You still have to have jackets and so on in high summer. And you get multiple bags. This time going to the Philippines, I decided absolutely not. I am going to pack light for once. And it was so exciting to not have to pack long trousers of any kind because it's the tropics. And some days 100% humidity. There's and a very casual, in the good sense, culture. There is no situation that require long trousers, or so I thought. Because why I visited now was part of the Siquijor healing tradition is they only collect herbs for everything that they use them for on 7 Fridays of the year, in between Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, which is obviously now. And Noel was very kind enough I did ask, he didn't just say, hey, come with me. I said, would it be possible if I could come with you one of these Fridays to gather the herbs and see what that process was about? And he said yes. He actually said if I'd been the week before, it would have been me and 18 Japanese people and in fact, when I did go, a Japanese, she's some kind of scientist, biologist, botanist, who lives on the island and is studying the medical efficacy of native herbs that are used on Siquijor. So she was really a good person to speak to. But anyway, the point is, for whatever reason, Japan is all over Siquijor and its traditions. They get Japanese visitors coming to get healing and so on. So I don't know, maybe Philippines and Japan are obviously closer. I don't know. I just found that odd that of all the countries to be really on top of going to Siquijor for healing, it's Japan for whatever reason. So Noel said, yes, you can come with me. However, you will need long trousers because of the snakes, and make them jeans. Now, I'm not as large as I was, but I'm still not small. And Asian people are generally a lot smaller than me. And that's certainly the case in the Philippines. And so shopping for long trousers in 100% humidity in the tropics with Asian sizes was like a Lilliput. It was high comedy. And I ended up, so now I have, and I'm the proud owner of some black and gray camouflage sweatpants that basically just fit. Not exactly jeans, would do nothing to protect from snakes. I was fine about it. I live in Australia. I'm not bothered about snakes. And I also know how to minimize hostile snake encounters. But I mean, you are also in the jungle. I'm going to throw up some video. There are plants that can scratch you and so on. Anyway, it was just one of those ironic moments of, I'm going to travel light for the first time in 2 years. I'm just going to take stuff as if it were, I mean, I took the camera and everything, but as if it were a holiday. And I had to get there and buy a bunch of stuff. The long trousers came in handy twice, actually, because it's still very Catholic. And the retired professor, Virgie Mikiabas, who I couldn't find her beforehand. And my guide, this is the kind of place Siquijor is. Here's a story. So my guide wasn't Chelsea. It was a different guy called Jorge. Was taking me around the island. And I said, I'm trying to find this professor, Virgie Mikiabas. And he's like, yeah, I know who she is because when I went to the college, her husband, who also worked there, was my something like year guide. I don't know. Whatever. So he knew what she looked like. Didn't know anything else. I said, I think she lives in Loreto. You don't need to know where that is. We're driving around the island, and I'm on the back of his bike. And all of a sudden, he just like stops and pulls to the side, and he just points behind. And there's the professor I'm after, just buying fish at a roadside stall. So I was able to arrange a time to go and meet and talk to her about her book, which she only printed 100 copies of which she had one, and quite rightly said, you can't have that one. And the other one was in the college library. So there are basically 2 copies of this book on the healing traditions based on her research. She's a historian and anthropologist or something on the whole island. And so I went to the library and signed in, and they gave me a guard to walk around with me the whole way. And speaking of the difference in size, I'm definitely bigger than Asian teenagers. It's college in the university sense, but like 18 to, 21. So definitely bigger than Asian teenagers. And walking into the library in my black and gray sweat trousers, dressed up to the nines as best I could. Literally, that was it. And to have all these Asian children stare at you, it was hilarious. They were lovely, but it was just this really comical moment of, well, this pair of sweatpants has come in handy twice. It protects from snakes and gets me access to college libraries. But yeah, so shopping on Siquijor is not what you would visit the island for. Let me put it that way. The college itself is fascinating. I've been to regional colleges in Peru, Fiji, Micronesia, Ecuador, and now the Philippines. Where else? There's more. It doesn't matter. They have this, I don't want to say poorly made, they're grimly made, these sort of cement fortresses essentially, but they are such wonderful, lovingly maintained places. They're really, because college has descended into pseudo-scientific, backward, deranged nightmare in the West that costs too much and delivers no value. It's like everything else in the West. It's collapsed under the weight of its own hypocrisy and disappointment. The regional colleges in remote parts of the world still have that promise of education. And the librarian, for instance, I knew one book, I knew Virgie's book to go and get. And she, when she worked out what I was there to research, kept coming back with other books and things that I would literally never have found, because there is one of them in the whole world, a master's thesis of, in fact, one of the other college professors from the early 90s. So typed up, not even word processed up, with handwritten charts in it. And it was printed out paper that was bound together. You're not going to find that on JSTOR, But that kind of love and competence of a regional college, because she knew the topic, not intimately, which, you're writing about the native healing traditions of Siquijor. In her head, she's like, okay, this, and this, and this. Was fantastic. I mean, maybe if you're old enough, you had, which I did in primary school, a librarian who was good like that. But that was wonderful. And it's an argument for why field research is still useful. That information, which will be in my book, is nowhere else on earth but the college library in Siquijor town on Siquijor. And you can ask the librarian specifically for it. And this isn't stuff that even locals, I think, are particularly interested in. There's a cringe component to it, which is worth unpacking at a later date. But I could tell from the back of it, the last time these books were checked out was 2019, 2016, so on. But yeah, it was an amazing experience to get to the island and have that adventure unpack, and to be able to go up into the mountain herb gathering and get different healing sessions with different healers, which I'm about to tell you about, find the information. It was wonderful. And it's built out this comparative map of Siquijor for me, and you'll hear more about it if you get the book, and there'll be more information in the members area. In fact, this episode is essentially an extended one. There's going to be the public one, and there's going to be an addendum which will be in the members area, because there's information that is member specific and also ties into what we're doing in the membership at the moment with the foundations. So let's talk about the healing traditions on Siquijor itself and healing practices. There is 3 broad categories, and 2 of them overlap. The first 2 overlap. So there's faith healer, and the first one I went to, Annie Ponce, who I think was the best. She describes herself as a faith healer and working with saints, working with sacred herbs, and a pulse diagnosis. And this is interesting. I couldn't work out, I mean, it's quite close to China, but I couldn't work out if the pulse diagnosis was modern, which is to say included, because it's a TCM thing, right? It's a Chinese medicine thing. Couldn't work out if it was within the last, say, 1.5 centuries, or if it's, centuries old, and came over who knows when. And it wasn't exactly the pulse diagnosis you'd get at the beginning of, say, an acupuncture session, but they would check your pulse to diagnose from their condition. And I actually got 2 in a row. So I had the session with Annie that I'm about to tell you about, and then I went the next day to go and see Noel, and that was to see if I could go up the mountain with him and so on, and to talk to him about his work. And so I'd had a healing session the day before, and so he grabs my wrists and he just looks at me and says, "You're fine." Like, yeah, well, I did just have one yesterday. Anyway, so back to Annie. If you're a premium member, it won't be in the addendum to this podcast, but I'm putting together a video that includes interviews with her about her life and practice. But she's double lineaged and works with everyone works with different saints, sort of. So San Roque or San Roque, obviously big on a healing island, but there is a San Roque church or San Roque down the hill from where Annie lives. There isn't, I checked on this with the healers I spoke to, too much overlap in the saints because, and I love this, what appears to happen is the patron saint of the town. So Annie lives in a town called San Antonio. So San Antonio is one of her saints. Santo Niño, a few others. But there isn't much of an overlap in the saints. It is the saints that particular person has resonance with from where they live, their background, but it's saint-based healing, calling it in. And so it's pulse diagnosis, followed by some prayers and some oil anointing, and then there's a massage component, and then there's what we would call, I suppose, energy healing, prayer-based faith healing. The sign out the front of Annie's house literally says Annie Ponce, faith healer, and she asked me if I was Catholic, which I said yes to, as long as there are no follow-up questions. The second type of healer is basically the same, saints, prayer, and herbs, but with more of an emphasis on the herbal healing. And so Noel Torremoche is one of them. And Annie does the same thing where often, not always, but some of the sessions will begin with sliding, essentially incense, but like sacred burning herbs underneath the seat you're sitting on, and they wrap you in a towel, almost like going to a barbershop, like you'll be wrapped so that you get a smoke schwitz, and you can begin with that. But Noel is more, he still has the saints and the prayers and the massage and so on, but he's more herb first. Annie is more Catholicism first. So there's 2 different kinds of healers in the broad category that are basically the same, but it depends on the emphasis. And the third is called the Bula Willow healer. And that's unique to Siquijor. And this is a method of extracting bad energy and bad spirits via a method of diagnosis where you have 1 or 2 sacred Bula Willow stones in a glass or receptacle of water and a straw. And I should have actually prepared, I don't have a Bula Willow stone, but I could have got a glass and a straw, I suppose. But they will blow and move the glass around your head and around your body. And what that does is pull the energy out into the water. So the stone is the thing that does that. And then they pour the water out into a bowl and check it with the light and see what's extracted. And then if they need to do it again, they do, and so on. Saints are still used and called. It's a very Catholic country. But the Bula Willow stone and the Bula Willow method is used to pull bad spirits or bad energy out of you. So Noel and Annie are lineaged, and some of them have dual lineage. And so I figured everyone is lineaged on the island, everyone I spoke to. And then I spoke to Loreto. He isn't lineaged. He was actually a farmer, and then at the age of 35, he was by the river and he saw a stone floating along the river. And this is after he'd had a few strange dreams, like God telling him to do stuff. And then he sees a stone floating along the top of the river. So he takes it home. He has 3 more nights of dreams where God tells him, you're a Bula Willow. That's what you do now. So that's the stone he uses. And that's really interesting to me. If you recall the episode on Maya Shamanism from a month or so ago with Rosita Avigo, talking about Don Eligio and how you aren't, dare I say, a proper shaman in a Guatemalan Mayan sense until you have your sastun, which is your spirit stone, which the spirits give to you. That was very interesting to me to hear. There is a similar process that happens on Siquijor. So those are the kind of 2.5, wait, is that right? Yeah, 2.5 or 3 different main healing categories. Now, one of the other things I asked everyone I spoke to about it is, what is the level of health of the healing traditions? Are they getting worse? Are young people interested in them or not? Because if you look at indigenous traditions around the world, very often young people in the clutches of modernity are less and less interested in it. That's certainly the case in Aboriginal Australia, unfortunately. Although there is a bit of a shift. Has been a bit of a shift in the last maybe 5 years. It is in rude health, as far as I can tell, and as far as I was told on Siquijor. A couple of reasons for that. First of all, the lineages are strong. People come from nearby islands to get healed, or internationally. And in fact, Annie asked, are you going to come back every year? What's going on? Do I need to? Shit, bitch. What have you seen? Her point was like, no, I have international clients who come and visit every year. So the lineages are still strong, but it's kind of good and bad news. I asked, are there more healers now than when you started? She says there is more. So there's a good news story and, dare I say, a bad news story, which is because of the foreigner, I was about to say tourist, interest in the healing traditions, there are people who have essentially just set up shop as Bula Willow or native healers, and they don't have a lineage. And everyone that I spoke to was very polite about that, which is to say, it's not like that won't work. Particularly if you're operating in a framework where it's saints and plant spirits and so on that's going to help you. It's not like that won't work. In theory, in practice, you are better off, obviously, with a lineaged healer. And so I have included that, like I said, there's Loreto, there's Noel, there's Annie that I not just spoke to, but spoke to multiple times and had sessions with. And I've put them literally on the map in the sense that I have put them on a Google map. And that isn't the sum total of lineaged healers on the island. Those are the ones that I did the most work with. I'm just saying, if you are looking for one and you don't know one way or the other, these 3 are lineage. Well, Loreto isn't lineaged, but he has, as far as I'm concerned, a proper initiation story with the floating stone and the dreams from God and so on. But the other 2, Annie and Noel, proper lineage trained healers. Doesn't mean there aren't other ones on the island that are, but these ones, in the sense they have my guarantee, if that makes sense. Again, you're welcome to find your own healers if you're going to the island. And funnily enough, when I let the membership know that some of the member material was going to be late, because I got a little like facial paralysis from my healing with Annie, which, given what I was working on, was to be expected. You shouldn't expect that. I would actually recommend Annie first, because that was to be expected at where I'm at with my healing journey. So that's how good she is my point. I don't mean like she gave me facial paralysis. Well, I'm fine now. But when I told the members that, oh, sorry, I'm on Siquijor doing work for the book, I actually had one member go, oh shit, I was just there like last week getting a healing for my father and so on. So I'm not, put it this way, the first white man to make it there. So when I say I put them on the map, I mean that literally. Although I will include in the show notes Chelsea's contact details via Facebook and Instagram if I've got it, because he came with me to every one of the healing sessions, except the first one with Annie, and also came up the mountain with me with Noel collecting plants and now knows them and knows the area. So you will have a guide, which you probably should have. A guide isn't like getting on one of those buses in New York that Tim Dillon used to have, where it goes on a certain route and you point at stuff. You basically pay someone this is sexier than it sounds. You pay someone to take you where you want to go on the island. And if you don't know where you want to go, they will take you to the random tourist spots, the secret beach, the big sacred tree, blah, blah, a couple of waterfalls, and so on. But Chelsea was excellent. He arranged for me to rent a car, which is a very difficult proposition on the island because I needed a car for a few days because I'd never ridden a scooter before. And I tried it for about an hour and I was sort of, like, I can do this, but the camera that I'm recording this on is $5,000. And I was there for work and that was going to be in my flimsy backpack. So it wasn't just the risk of if I come off this, I may injure myself and ruin this trip. I might land on a very expensive camera and I can't do it. So I ended up paying for a trike rider and Chelsea for a couple of days, which isn't that much money. It's cheaper than renting a car. And then I rented a car as far as I could. And that turned out to be the right decision. If you haven't ridden a scooter before, the roads are fine if you're going around the island. They're not great, they're fine. But if you're going up the hill, they're not as good. It's a more extreme environment and they don't get the government money quite so much. Anyway, that's the process. Like, I'm going to link that up below and hopefully I don't need to link up a Google map, but I will if I need to. Otherwise, I will just list the names of the healers. I went on this whole rant about Google Maps when I was there because many of you know I used to work for Yelp, which is a competing product I know a lot about. And in fact, Google tried to hire me to work on their local projects for a lot of money. So I used to know this world intimately, and Google Maps has gotten worse. Google Maps today is worse than the maps that Yelp had when I was working for them 8 years ago. Anyway, that's a side rant. My point is, I will make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, in the show notes, you will have the links. We have the names of the people to find on Google Maps, and you will have a link to contact Chelsea if you are going to the island, so that you can either do all of this stuff yourself, or you can do it the way I did, which is using locals who can, yes, assist foreigners. And Chelsea knows everyone in San Juan, so it was good it's not just finding the healers, it's very much a place of who you know, like, do you feel like sushi? Well, this is really good. That one's not so good. He was worth his money, put it that way. So that's my experience with the Island of the Witches and the healing traditions of Siquijor. There's going to be more. There's more in the members area that I'm about to record once I've done with this one. But I do just I wanted to put my thoughts together. I thought I was going to put them together once I got back to Manila because it was 3 days back home as well. So, get an afternoon ferry that takes several hours, get a much delayed flight from Dumaguete to Manila. And then I had a member event. And so it was 2 nights in Manila. And I thought I was going to do it there, but it didn't feel right. And actually at the member lunch that I had, the equal smallest member lunch, because there are 2 members in Manila, that there was only going to be 1, which would have been the smallest, but now it's equal smallest with Merida, Mexico, which was amazing. And we had a great time. But a couple of things came up in that conversation that I would not have included in the member video had it been otherwise. But yes, if you hadn't heard of it, Siquijor is a remarkable place, and it is a place that I'm glad exists in the world. It's wonderful, even when you're not on it, to know that there is like a famous island of healers where there are strong lineages and people are actually doing that work according to sacred timing and sacred calendars, which I'll talk more about in the members area. It's just nice to know that it's there. Magic, in, dare I say, a best case expression, can be found in the world and can be found comparatively easily. The Philippines is easy enough to get to. I mean, it's got huge airports. It's a country of 120 million people, It's a bit annoying to get to Siquijor, but you should be grateful for that because there's not a lot of reason otherwise to visit Siquijor. It's got a couple of waterfalls, which are nice, but there are better waterfalls in the Philippines. And it's got some beaches, but there are certainly better beaches in the Philippines. The Philippines officially, apparently, although I dispute this, not that my opinion matters, has the best beach in the world, which is near El Nido in Palawan. The Philippines is the trouble. This is a weird way to end. Philippines has become, after Bali, because Bali has been used up, or is becoming the new disgusting white traveler destination. Social media managers who will take a 6-month sabbatical from their job to go and pretend to be a travel vlogger somewhere. Lost LeBlanc crowd has discovered the Philippines, or is in the process of discovering the Philippines. Now, there's not a lot of they're in Palawan and El Nido more, and yes, a few other islands. There's not a lot going on Siquijor that is the best. Waterfalls and everything that they try to advertise, there is better stuff elsewhere. So consequently, it's not yet that touristic. And maybe that's why they call everyone foreigners. It's getting there, and it will open up more with the airport. But historically, it's less so now, because even though the Philippines is very Catholic, it's also getting quite modern. Historically, a lot of people wouldn't visit it because of its witchcraft reputation. But the good news, funnily enough, is like the beaches are lovely, but people who are listening to this show are going to be going there for the healing reasons primarily, and the other stuff secondarily. So it's good in a way that it's difficult to get to, because it's difficult to get to, and it doesn't have anything ghastly foreigners would race to get. All that other stuff, there's the Instagram pictures are better in El Nido, right? To take the picture of you in a G-string standing on the edge of a boat looking at clear water, because no one's ever done that before. You can do that in Siquijor, but you're better off in other parts of the Philippines. So it's still got a living vibe to it if you are looking to visit. I've only been back a day, but it's stayed with me. It's sunk in as a place that I am happy exists, and I learned so much from the whole process, not just from the healing sessions, but understanding the island, understanding the mountain, gathering the herbs, and doing the research and so on. It's an amazing place, and I love its whole journey. It's almost a reverse journey for Western magic, of previously being Island of the Witches, now being Island of Healers, and the cringe that comes with that modernity influenced sheepishness about traditions that is now going away, which is good. There was, and I'm not sure how much of it still is going on, there was still sorcery. People who train to become healers on the island know how to do the bad stuff too. So there used to be, and I met a guy in Manila his mother believes his grandmother cursed them because the mother married a man who was poor and beneath her station. And so and they have actually had some very serious bad luck, and they no longer speak to the grandmother. But she was from Siquijor, and he was telling me this story of like black inverted candles and so on. So the Island of the Witches' reputation is not just Spanish Catholic fear. If you know how to do one thing, you know how to do the other. We know this, that's the story of magic. So everyone went to great pains to tell me, there are no witches left on the island, and methinks the island doth protest a wee bit too much. I didn't encounter any when I was there, or anywhere that felt particularly witchy in that sense. But yeah, so the reputation was warranted as well as unwarranted, and the reputation as Island of Healers is absolutely warranted. And so if you're looking for another place to put on your bucket list, Siquijor, the Island of the Witches, is certainly one of them.